Man, I knew things had taken a turn for the worst, but I didn't anticipate that this whole situation would get this bad. And unfortunately, from the messaging we're getting from these large AI companies, these corporate executives, and from DRAM manufacturers, the worst has yet to come. I don't think people realize just how horrific the ramifications this explosion on DRAM pricing has on just not just the PC hardware gaming scene, but also other industries. And we're going to be talking about all those that are affected and what this means for the future of the PC gaming hardware industry, gaming in general, and all of that. So let's get into it. Hey, if you enjoy content like this, drop a like, make sure to subscribe, and smash that bell so you never miss another video. Hey, what is going on, guys? Danny here. Welcome back to the channel, and I hope you're all doing well. I wanted to make a follow-up video to a topic that we briefly discussed in a previous video of mine, which was kept, shortened because I was mainly focusing on the rumored upcoming RTX 50 Super Series, or potentially upcoming, that could even be delayed or canceled given this whole situation, which if you are interested in that subject, you can check that video out. But for this video, I wanted to talk more about this whole situation surrounding the insane increase in DRAM and memory pricing, which I think will have some serious effects on not just the gaming PC market, but many other industries. And unfortunately, I feel like the worst has yet to come. And, it's absolutely insane to me to see just how much prices have soared for components. It almost feels like DRAM has become something akin to like an investment, as if people are investing in gold or silver and watching their money grow. Like I said in the start of the video, I hadn't anticipated things would become this bad, and if you're someone who's looking to enter the market to build a gaming PC, unfortunately, you've entered the market at one of the worst times, which is a shame because in like August, it seemed like prices on parts was pretty good, and the holiday season would be booming with deals. I mean, it still kind of is, but we're going to be coming back to that. So we're going to be talking about all of that, how much prices have increased on various kits, what the implications are on not just, the PC hardware scene, but on other consumer electronics. And what I wanted to talk about first was give a overview as to, why this is happening, so you guys have a background on where this whole demand is coming from and what caused the prices to soar in such a short span. The short answer is that AI has basically come in and flipped the entire memory market on its head. Over the last couple of years, you've had companies like OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon, these large gargantuan corporations, multi-billion-dollar corporations, all racing each other to build these massive data centers packed with GPUs, and every single one of those GPUs needs a ton of super fast memory to feed it. We're not talking about, regular DDR5 kits that you and I buy. We're talking about, server DDR5 and especially HBM, which is stacked high bandwidth memory you see on things like Nvidia's H100 and B200 chips. And recently, with these large partnerships with OpenAI, with companies like Samsung, it's caused a knee-jerk reaction with their competitors to essentially do the same. The same handful of companies that make our consumer DRAM, Samsung, SK Hynix, Micron, and they're the ones, who are supplying all this stuff. So when the AI money started to pour in, they naturally pivoted a huge chunk of their production over to those higher margin products and series. On top of that, you do have to remember that we did come out of a period just recently where PC demand did actually crater a bit. So you had these companies come out and tell us that they were going to actually start to cut on wafer production and slow investment because prices were starting to go in the gutter because of the oversupply. Now, demand has snapped right back up. AI is hoovering up every chip it can get its hands on. Capacity isn't ramping as fast as the orders are coming in. And instead of the usual oversupply crash, we're stuck in this extreme shortage period where the enterprise guys get their dips first, and then everyone else, including regular gamers, are left fighting over what's left at much higher prices. Unfortunately, right now, what you're seeing is actually just straight up price gouging, because remember, it's not like all these kits that these guys were sitting on, at shelves at retailers and distributors were magically bought at these new and inflated contract prices overnight. And a lot of that stock was, ordered months ago when DRAM was still relatively cheap. But as soon as Samsung, SK Hynix, Micron, and co. started jacking up contract pricing, we're talking about Samsung hiking up DDR5 modules by 50 to 60% in a couple of months. Everyone down the chain, they saw the headlines, they saw the spot prices jump, and instantly they repriced everything to match the new reality instead of what their actual costs were those months ago. You've got TrendForce reports talking about how DRAM contract prices is up triple digits year over year, and DDR5 kits now routinely selling for $300 to $800, depending on the capacity, even $1,000 plus. And don't worry, we're going to get more into that. But this gives retailers all that justification that they need to slap on a new sticker on old inventory and then call it a day. On top of that, we're seeing the big memory heads and distributors. They've literally been limiting shipments and playing games with supply to keep spot prices up while buyers are panicking and, FOMO buying with whatever they can get their hands on. So yeah, there is a genuine shortage at the wafer level thanks to the new AI demand. But what you and I are experiencing and feeling as consumers right now is this nasty combo of real supply constraints plus every middleman and their grandma in the chain taking the opportunity to fatten their margins on stock that they already paid for the old price. And as a consumer, that doesn't really feel right. And if you're not in any urgent need, then I would recommend boycotting that practice. So speaking of prices, I wanted to take a look at pricing now and see what kits are going for based on speed, latency, and capacities, because I did briefly talk about that in my last video 2 weeks ago, but in that short time, prices have just drastically changed. And there are websites like DRAM Exchange, which is a global market intelligence provider that specializes in research and analysis for DRAM and NAND flash memory modules. And they're also able to provide us with like this whole catalog of what specific RAM chip pricing is going for. And it's changing throughout the day. It's like watching the stock or crypto market. I didn't think I'd ever say that about a PC component, but here we are. And then when it comes to memory kits, like for example, your typical AMD Ryzen 7000 or 9000 build, gamers will often settle for your typical DDR5 32GB 6000 CL30 kit. And these kits earlier this year were going for around $120 or $100 on sale. And now if we take a look at Newegg.com for the pricing for these kits, it's ridiculous. They're selling for $330, $440, $450. That is just absolutely insane. And these are just 32GB kits. And some enthusiasts would also opt for higher speed and lower latency DDR5 kits, and those are going for like $470. These are commonly purchased DDR5 kits, and they cost as much as a PS5 now. It's just absolutely crazy. Now, what if you have someone who is, delving into workstation and creative applications? Having more system memory is always useful and actually preferred in those scenarios. And if you're looking for 64GB DDR5 6000 kits here, they're selling for north of $800. And since it's the holidays and Black Friday season, we see some quote-unquote deals pop up, and you can purchase this 64GB kit from Newegg for $570. Wow, that's such an amazing deal, right? Like, that is just absolutely fucking crazy. When these kits in August were selling for $220 to $250, that's like a 4x price increase. It's just ridiculous. And if you are a big baller and you need 96GB, then you're looking at $1,000 plus easily. But it can get worse if you're on Intel, because with Intel's LGA 1700 platform, so that's your 14th generation Raptor Lake CPU, or the LGA 1851 platform with Arrow Lake, so that's your 285K, you can push speeds well beyond 6,000 mega transfers, and performance does scale. Like 7,000 plus for Raptor Lake, and Arrow Lake can easily run 8,200 or even 9,000 if you know how to tune or if you have a 2-DIMM board. But interestingly, 7,200 32GB kits are selling for around the same price as those 6,000 CL30 kits, which I'm assuming is because demand for those lower tiered kits is pushing the price higher, since AMD is dominant in the DIY space, whereas most people aren't buying 7,200 kits for those systems because you just can't run it properly. But if you're overclocking and want really high frequency kits, a DDR5 48GB 8200 kit is selling for $500 US, which, relative to the other kits that we saw, doesn't actually seem like a bad deal, all things considered. Like, if I was some desperate individual who really needed to buy RAM right now, I'd just pay the extra $50 or $70 and get one of those 48GB kits over those overpriced 32GB kits. But still, it doesn't take away from the fact that how ridiculous this market has become. And, just to highlight how ridiculous everything has become, I quickly went on PC Part Picker and whipped up a build. Nothing crazy, just an average mid-range build. And I know you can probably find CPU and GPU deals that are better than what's seen here from like Black Friday door crashers. But again, like I was saying, this is just something I quickly whipped up in 2 minutes, so I didn't bother looking extensively. And what you're looking at here is a build without the RAM. It totals up to $1,000, $1,170. So in terms of using current generation new parts, that's pretty average. And in fact, our GPU, the 5070, is below MSRP, so that's a pretty good deal. And for this kind of average mid-range gamer build, you'd see the consumer go for those 32GB CL30 kits, since this is a AMD system after all. And if this was just 2 months ago, it would push the price up by like $100, $120. So altogether, you'd be looking at like $1,300 for this mid-range build, which again is pretty normal. In fact, I'd say if it wasn't for this whole RAM situation, it would be a pretty decent time to build a gaming PC, considering pricing for all other components is selling for normal pricing, or things have really started to come back down to earth, or they're selling for below MSRP. But look at what happens when I throw in the DDR5 32GB 6000 CL30 RAM in there. The price jumps up by nearly $350. That's just not going to be feasible, guys. This crap right here pretty much kills any desire to build this system. And as an alternative, I did see people suggesting that, you could go the DDR4 route, but keep in mind, once other people start switching their attention to DDR4, that's going to spike up demand and thus spike prices. And it does seem like prices for DDR4 have actually started to go up, not to the extent of DDR5, but, that stuff is much faster and higher. But for DDR4, not as severe. But this was another build that I just quickly made up in PC Part Picker using the AM4 platform. So a Ryzen 7 5800X, still a fairly capable CPU, a B550 motherboard, and a DDR4 32GB 3200 CL16 kit. So nothing crazy, and we're seeing this build come in at around $1,170. Coincidentally, the same as what the other build cost us without the DDR5 RAM. You can also improve things here quite substantially, actually, by going with a 12600KF, which is a much faster CPU than a 5800X, and comes in cheaper, actually. And remember, LGA 1700, some motherboards still support DDR4, so you could even buy a 13700K or 14900K and just run that on a DDR4. It sucks because generally now DDR5 will be faster and better for gaming for all these new games that are coming out. And where I'd say DDR4 could trade blows with DDR5 is only if you have like this Godbin 10900K you're rocking, or you're rocking a LGA 1700 DDR4 board and you're running Samsung B-Die memory at like 4400 megahertz CL16. But that is a very, very small percentage of people who can actually run or achieve that. And you know what? Good luck trying to find Samsung B-Die now. So like I was saying earlier, this whole situation created by this huge demand and inflation, which with memory kits is deterring just a lot of people away from the DIY market. And I even posted a tweet on my Twitter or X about this whole situation and included a screenshot with pricing from my area. And it was the most viewed tweet I had ever posted. And I don't even have any substantial following at all on Twitter, which just goes to show you how everyone and their grandma is watching RAM pricing right now. This will unfortunately continue to get worse, though, because if you look at the trajectory of RAM pricing, things are changing daily. And I wouldn't be surprised if next month a DDR5 32GB kit costs like $600 plus. And here in Canada, pricing has already gone off completely off the rails, and we're seeing those same kits sell for like $700 plus. So it's just insane. Furthermore, this is now actually spilling on over into other components. You can track SSD prices as well and start to notice that prices in this area has started to spike. Not as severe as what we're seeing for like memory kits, but again, things could easily change as quickly as what we saw with DRAM. So hey, if you're in need of storage or you're looking to make upgrades to existing systems, it might be a good time to just pull the trigger on those NVMe SSDs now. And then when it comes to graphics cards, these components also have their own onboard memory subsystems, GDDR7 on the current generation 50 series, GDDR6 on the 9000 series from AMD. And AMD has already come out and officially communicated this to the media that they are going to be increasing GPU prices across the stack by at least 10% to help preserve their margins. This report does come from Tech Power Up, and within that report, they state PowerColor is now actually urging gamers to purchase GPUs during the holiday season, and that 2026 is when we will see the price hike. It could be that AIBs have actually locked in their old pricing mechanisms for now with the old pricing that AMD gave them, that old structure. This is also happening just as AMD's Radeon RX 9070 and 9070 XT graphics cards have finally reached their MSRP of $549 and $599 respectively, and I've actually seen them come below MSRP as well. So obviously, yeah, they're going to be telling their customers, don't wait, go buy right now. Things are going to get worse. And I'm not going to completely discredit it. There definitely could be some good advice there because by next quarter, we could certainly see prices go up given everything. And I mean, right now, if you look around, there are a number of deals for graphics cards for, AIB 9070 XTs that are selling for below MSRP. At least in my area, I've seen them. So I do agree, if you do need a GPU right now, it would be a good time to pull the trigger. The same goes for Nvidia as well, right? Definitely can bet your money on them following suit with this, and you can expect prices for their GPUs to also increase. I remember hearing how in China, with this whole GPU smuggling situation that they have there, they have these chop shops that are basically accumulating 50 series GPUs and then desoldering the GDDR7 modules on them and then reselling those chips separately. So again, if you see a GPU deal right now and you were considering upgrading, might just be a good opportunity for you to just pull the trigger because NVIDIA GPUs, like I showed in the earlier example, some of them are actually starting to fall below MSRP. And unfortunately, things actually are projected to become worse because this whole situation is much larger than the whole crypto mining boom, because during that time, we did have individuals and mining farms trying to crash in on the whole bull run. But AI is completely different. We're talking about absolutely gargantuan companies hoarding the supply for themselves. Now, you might be thinking, sucks to be a PC gamer, but this isn't just a PC hardware problem. This extends to pretty much anything with a screen and a power button, guys. Laptops, handheld devices like your Steam Deck or MSI Claw, ROG Ally, consoles, right? The PS5 and Xbox, smartphones, and even your smart TV. They all have DRAM in them. And unlike a DIY desktop where you can just say, screw it, I'll just reuse my old kit for now, a lot of these devices have onboard or soldered LPDDR5 or LPDDR5X. And so the RAM is actually baked right onto the board itself. That means when DRAM contract prices go up 70 to 170% year over year, like we're seeing now, OEMs are either going to have to eat the cost, or as we all know, what they do is they just pass it off to the consumer. We're already seeing that companies like HP are warning investors that this memory inflation alone is shaving roughly 30 cents off their earnings per share, and that they're gonna have to respond by tweaking configurations, raising prices on notebooks going into 2026. TrendForce is actually saying the same thing on the analysis side, with DRAM and NAND pricing jumping up. The bill of materials for laptops and phones is climbing up another 5 to 7% next year. And that's enough for them to revise their 2026 PC and smartphone shipment forecast from slight growth to actual declines. So if you're that person who usually waits for, that back to school laptop sale or cheap gaming notebooks on like Black Friday or during the Christmas holiday shopping events, don't be surprised to see if that quote unquote deal either has way less RAM than it should, or the price tag has quietly crept up by like another $100 or $200 or so. Consoles and mobile devices are also in the crosshairs as well. There are already multiple reports of Microsoft, completely panicking here, and they might have to hike up prices for the third time on the Xbox Series X and S, because GDDR6 costs are also spiking, and their RAM supply is actually getting squeezed a lot harder than Sony's. And meanwhile, Sony has said that they have already apparently stockpiled GDDR6 for PS5 and the PS5 Pro, which is why they can still run discounts right now, while Microsoft sales reps are actually warning retailers about another potential price bump. And like we were just talking about smartphones, TrendForce is already seeing memory make up 10 to 15% of a smartphone's BOM cost, with DRAM contract prices up more than 75% year on year. That's translated into about a 8 to 10% increase in the actual unit cost of a device in 2025. So what are brands doing here? Exactly what you'd expect. They're raising prices on mid-range and flagship models, cutting or de-emphasizing the low-end stuff where margins are thin, and in some cases quietly trimming RAM capacities on cheaper phones so they can still hit a certain price point. And again, it doesn't stop at phones. Smart TVs, streaming boxes, routers, like anything smart in your house pretty much relies on the DRAM supply. So as long as AI data centers are hoarding this whole buffet, the rest of the consumer electronics world, so just your average person like you or I, are gonna be stuck fighting over scraps and paying more for that privilege, unfortunately. So I wanted to pivot now and then talk about what this actually means for gaming going forward. Well, if people are actually going to be priced out of getting decent hardware, they're going to be pushed down to two very different paths. The first path is fine, I'm just going to stream everything. Cloud gaming has actually come quite a long way. You've got Xbox cloud gaming baked into smart TVs and Fire Sticks now, and Xbox has this whole positioning that anything can be an Xbox if you can get that Xbox app on there. And for a lot of people, it really might be the cheapest way for them to go or to get something as close to a Series X experience without ever owning a console or a gaming PC. And services like GeForce Now literally run on a potato laptop or Chromebook so long as you've got 4 gigs of RAM and a halfway modern CPU. So the upfront cost is almost nothing compared to dropping $1,500 on a mid range rig, right? But the trade off can be pretty brutal. You don't actually own anything. You're at the mercy of licenses and a subscription model tier. And your entire experience is actually beholden to your internet connection and the actual routing itself. Nvidia themselves say that you need something like 25 megabits per second and a sub 80 millisecond latency for a decent 1080p 60 stream experience, right? And unfortunately, that's actually not going to be realistic or stable for a big chunk of folks around the world. As someone who works in telecom infrastructure for my day job, I know that is definitely not going to be feasible. So, yeah, cloud gaming can sure be some sort of a lifeline if you're priced out of the GPU and DRAM market or even the console market potentially, but it also kind of shoves you into this whole deeper rental ecosystem where you never really get off that treadmill of monthly fees. And this isn't necessarily a detriment to these companies either. For Microsoft and Nvidia, in some cases, this is the business model they'd actually prefer you to be on, one where you are tied to a recurring monthly fee rather than a one-time hardware payment, right? And the second path is almost the opposite. Instead of chasing the max graphics, max fidelity, ray tracing everything dream, people are just going to tap out and settle for these low power, cheap devices and games that actually respect that. So instead of, stressing over whether your hardware can run the latest 200 gigabyte UE5 game with path tracing, you end up gravitating towards lighter stuff, 2D indies, stylized, smaller scope games that still deliver a ton of fun without needing, a big giant 10K gaming station at your house. And, indies have been leaning towards this for multiple years. There are devs literally buying, $100 junk PCs just to make sure their game can run on, lower end hardware. So that way they are able to provide that accessibility for a wide variety of gamers, a wide variety of people who can't afford those big rigs, right? And it's actually working. This is very interesting. I was taking a look into this on Steam. Indie games now account for almost half of game revenue and the majority of copies sold, which is, a massive, massive portion of the market. And they're pretty much giving this message saying that, yeah, I'm good with smaller, cheaper games as long as they're fun. That's all I care about. I don't care about graphics. They can take a backseat. I don't need these super photorealistic games. And you can take a look at the Steam hardware server and see what common hardware that people are rocking. And it's one of the reasons why Valve chose to go with the specifications for the Steam machine. And I haven't made a video or talked about the Steam machine yet. And I'm holding off on doing that because I want to reserve judgment until the price is out, because once that pricing is out, that is where the whole conversation gets interesting, and that's what's going to make the device, what's going to make or break the device. So you'll see more people sticking with, integrated graphic laptops, cheap pre-built boxes, handhelds, and then loading stuff on it. That Silk Song, Megabonk, Escape from Duck-Off tier of those lightweight games that don't require you to own a 4090 or 64 gigabytes of RAM just to hit 60 FPS. You could run those games on a 1060 from nearly 10 years ago, no problem at all. And you know what the scary part about this whole situation is? For the big budget side of the industry, is that these kinds of paths, both of them actually erode the traditional AAA model. If a chunk of your audience is moving towards streaming, then the platform holder is suddenly the gatekeeper, not the hardware enthusiast building a PC. And if another big chunk of that says, screw AAA, I'm going to play cheap indies from now on going forward, or I'm just going to emulate classics, then you've got the situation where those old games and indies or AA studios are dominating and they're the ones who are going to be growing, while AAA teams are stuck with these insane production costs, longer dev cycles, and a shrinking pool of players who are actually willing to pay those high prices, and buy the hardware to showcase those games properly. And it's going to be a major wake-up call for those studios. They're going to have to look at themselves and finally do a bit of self-reflection and ask, does our game really justify these hardware requirements? Because in most cases, a lot of examples this year, it hasn't. And you can take a look at stuff like Borderlands 4, The Outer Worlds 2, games that look like they should be able to easily run on 2015 hardware, but require a $700, $800 plus GPU with frame generation and upscaling to run smoothly. It's just absolutely crazy. So when DRAM and GPU pricing goes off the rails, it's not just annoying for DIY builders. Long term, it can legitimately reshape what kinds of games get made and who they're made for and how we're allowed to actually access them, right? And yeah, when we bring all of this together, I think we're heading into a really ugly transition period for both the hardware and gaming scene, where AI, corporate greed, and bad decision making are all just colliding at once. And as usual, the people who are getting squeezed in the middle are just regular gamers like you and I, who just want to buy a decent kit of memory or a mid-range GPU or console without taking a loan. In the short term, my advice would be, don't panic buy, don't feed into the whole FOMO, and really be intentional with your upgrades. Evaluate all other options, see what other alternatives are out there. If your current rig is doing the job, just, ride it out and maybe grab some storage or just do like a GPU upgrade to really bide your time with. But I would absolutely hold off on DDR5 unless you absolutely have no choice. In the long term, if these trends do continue, I think we're going to be seeing more and more people either pushed out into that subscription-based streaming ecosystem, which is what these guys want, which, you're not going to own anything, or they'll just piece out of the AAA rat race and go all in on cheaper hardware and the indie titles that actually respect their wallet and time. And if that happens at that scale, then a lot of these big publishers and hardware vendors are going to have a very, very rude awakening, and they realize that constantly chasing higher specs, higher prices, and higher margins while actually ignoring optimization and accessibility was not a sustainable strategy. This is the bubble that people are talking about. But that's just been my whole take on this whole DRAM disaster. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and let me know what your plans are. But that's going to be doing it for this one. We'll touch base in the next video. Take care. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.